Welcome back. Well, with us now, Mr. Martin George, attorney, who is the chairman of the Tobago Business Chamber. He's talking about something he wants to prosecute, proper THA assessment. The THA's finances should be audited. That's what he's saying. Mr. George, thank you very much. Come along.
Good morning to you, Andy, and good morning to your viewers on WESN.
All right, thank you very much. Well, just before we get into the substance of this matter, I'm just trying to get a sense from you as to what's the word among, well, your own sort of cohorts and the people you've been discussing with in Tobago between Saturday and now on this question of what is loosely referred to as the vaccine mandate now handed down on us? What's the word?
Well, I mean, Andy, we of the Tobago Business Chamber, we were at the forefront of calling on the government very early to say that, look, you have to basically take the bull by the horns. When you are put in a position of leadership, sometimes you have to take difficult decisions. Sometimes you have to take decisions that at first may seem unpopular. But at the end of the day, if it is that it's for the greater good, then it has to be done. And Andy, I'll just give us a bit of context in terms of historically. If we recall, in 1796, when the smallpox vaccine was first created, there was tremendous opposition to it, even though it was hailed as a miracle cure for a disease that was killing millions of people. People who were vaccine hesitant, they were vaccine resistant, they had anti-vaccination leagues that formed. I'm talking about 1796, so you're talking centuries ago.
300 years ago.
The idea of anti-vaccination and vaccine resistance and vaccine hesitancy is not something new. However, in the UK, they recognized that, look, despite all the resistance that people were given, it was necessary. And in 1853, the United Kingdom passed its Mandatory Vaccination Act, which made it mandatory that you must be vaccinated for the smallpox. So therefore, there's historical precedent for this type of thing, because sometimes it is necessary for the greater good that these decisions have to be taken. So we have always been at the forefront calling for this, because we say you have to take a decision and ensure that the larger population is really protected in that way.
You probably would have heard Mr. Sarah Richards moments ago. He's saying what is missing here, what has been missing is the principle and the process of consultation with workers' representatives, and that's not the way to go.
Well, the point is, at the end of the day, Andy, if you spend the time consulting with every group or every body or every, activist who wishes to have their say on this, you will be consulting until the cows come home, if you understand me. We have to understand that sometimes it is necessary, even at the expense of people saying, well, look, their rights have been trampled or whatever, you may have to take certain decisions. And Andy, we in Trinidad and Tobago, we also have precedent here for this. So I don't know why people are behaving as if this is something that is novel or, unique. Under Section 6.1 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, Chapter 8808, it stipulates that it shall be the duty of every employer to ensure, as far as reasonably practicable, the safety, health, and welfare of work of all his employees. So therefore, if the government as an employer says, look, we have to take a decision to ensure the safety and welfare and health of our employees, and this is the decision that we've taken, then so be it. It sometimes is necessary to do so, and you do have legislation to back it. We also have the precedent in Trinidad and Tobago of the public health legislation, which has been on the books for years. All of us have been through it, Andy. That's how we got our vaccinations in primary school. Section 5 of the Public Health, Nursery Schools and Primary Schools Immunization Act, Chapter 28.3 of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. And this has been on the books for years. All of us have been through it. That's how we have our little vaccination mark on our arms, right? It says, where any communicable disease has become epidemic, or where an epidemic of any such disease is threatened, the minister may, by order, suspend from attendance at any nursery school or primary school persons to whom a certificate of a medical practitioner certifying that immunization against any such disease is not advisable on medical grounds was issued pursuant to Section 3.1 or refuse to carry or refuse entry to any such person at any school. So in other words, the act says if you are not immunized, you can't go to a public primary school. And we all know that. We've all been through that. So this is not anything novel. It's just that we as adults, now that you're telling us the same thing, people are saying, well, I have my constitutional rights. Yes, but the greater good is always in favor of what is best for the nation as a whole.
Yeah, and this is one of the cases in which sometimes when people in government, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because there were people
Yes, it is. Definitely is.
All right. So let's move to this issue about the THA then, the finances. You're saying that you're calling for proper audits of the THA.
Well, the fact of the matter is, Andy, this is something that the Auditor General has complained about repeatedly. We've seen the reports from 2008 coming forward. The Auditor General has made it clear that there is little accountability, lack of transparency. There is, no proper record keeping, no proper accounting for money spent, no proper, check vouchers produced. So this has been a problem bedeviling the THA for years. And Andy, it's not just a THA problem or a Tobago problem, it's a national problem. Because at the end of the day, one has to recall and remember that the THA is given, between $3 to $4 billion of public monies every year to, meet its expenses. So therefore, in those circumstances, there must be some level of accountability. And we have seen that this has not been occurring. So therefore, given the fact that the PDP has campaigned on a platform of transparency, accountability, and good governance, I would think that it's incumbent upon them as part of their first mandate to ensure that they conduct a proper audit, see what has happened, and that they, going forward, also manage the affairs of Tobago with the same tenets of transparency, accountability, and good governance that they have been championing and calling for. Because you can't call for it in terms of the previous regime, and when you are in power, you're not living up to the same standard. So they have to show that they are going to be doing something different and making it more accountable and more relevant to the people of Tobago in terms of how they manage the monies going forward. So it is really an important exercise. And we, of course, you heard from the Chief Secretary where he said that it appears that quite a bit of money has gone unaccounted for. So therefore, it is necessary to do that reckoning and that audit and call in to book to see where the monies have actually been spent.
You think that will include, in this instance, you think that will include the monies spent in the election campaign, just mashed?
Well, if it is that monies were spent for purposes other than what they were earmarked for, in other words, if it is that you say, look, I'm giving a $50 million, allocation to help hotels and small businesses and guest houses, etc., and instead it's been used as a political slush fund, then of course I would hope that there would be some reckoning for that, because then that is clearly illegal in terms of the public purpose for which it was stated, And I mean, I heard the Chief Secretary speak of $163 million that he doesn't seem to be able to find. So therefore, I mean, questions are going to be asked, Andy, because, the fact of the matter is we in Trinidad and Tobago, we've gotten basically immune. We've gotten basically numb and dumb to the idea of, political squandermania and the fact that, our politicians seem to act with impunity when it comes to, lack of accountability and lack of transparency in financial dealings. We almost seem to accept it. But if it is that this new administration of the THA is basically drawing a line in the sand and saying, hey, listen, this is not going to happen going forward, then I would be the happiest person, if they really live up to that standard and keep to their word.
You have any sense that they would not live up to the expectations they created on this particular issue?
Well, Andy, at the end of the day, they're politicians. And politicians, unfortunately, have a history of doing exactly as we, saw from since George Orwell wrote his classic animal farm, where you saw that, those who were not in charge, complained about the faults of the leaders in charge. They took over, and then they became exactly the same as the ones they, complained about. So that's the nature of politicians and the nature of politics. We are hoping that they will break the mold and prove themselves differently. And of course, we are giving them the opportunity to prove that they can do differently. But of course, we bear in mind the historical context and the historical precedents, which have shown that, sometimes the more things change, the more they remain the same.
And you think that the population in Tobago who voted, so enthusiastically for the THA will sit by and allow that?
Well, it's not a question of sitting by and allowing it, Andy. The fact of the matter is we change governments by an electoral process. In Tobago, it's every 4 years. In the general election, it's every 5 years. And that's the way we change governments. So whether you want to sit by and allow it or not, at the end of the day, they're there for 4 years at least. So, it's a question of how they manage the expectations of the people, how they live up to those expectations. And of course, if they don't, I guess in 4 years' time, the people will show them how they feel about it.
Yeah, I have to say that I'm not sufficiently immersed in the issue about the Zipline business that was such a critical talking point in the election. Does that come into there at all in terms of monies that are unaccounted for?
Well, I would imagine that as part of the broader investigation, there would be some investigation into that issue because, the allegation is quite scandalous when one hears what is alleged, that, millions of dollars were spent on this project and there's basically nothing to show for it. But, Andy, this is just one of a series of fiascos. Remember the artist D'Angelo, who was paid huge sums of monies in US dollars to come and perform at the jazz festival and never showed up. And then afterwards, you heard this spurious, specious excuse that, his grandfather died and he had to stay for the funeral. What rubbish. Which international performing artist could ever give that as an excuse and not give back the money on top of that? Then of course, belatedly after all the years, you heard the THA then saying, oh, well, they are looking to initiate legal action to try and recover the monies. But the fact of the matter is they have been reckless, careless, and, they just couldn't give a damn, so to speak, about how they spent money. And that reckoning ought to be done, and there ought to be some accountability. And I hope that this current administration not only brings, some sort of due diligence and investigation into what transpired in the past, but also brings that same due diligence in terms of their dealings going forward in the future with financial matters.
Okay, just fill us in, me in particular. Who's the finance secretary post the election?
The finance secretary is Farley Augustus, the chief secretary.
All right, so he's held that portfolio for himself, and therefore
he took that portfolio. Previously, it was held by Joel Jack,
right,
who was deputy chief secretary.
Yes, but yes. He's putting some importance in that, so we can expect, or you all are putting all those things on his shoulders, and he has to deliver.
Well, that's the point. You see, the thing is, given the high expectations that the people of Tobago have in terms of this new administration, the burden is heavy on them in terms of their delivery, because the point is you've raised the bar to a certain level, so therefore you now have to live up to that and ensure that you meet the same standard that you've set, on the election trail.
Yeah, but one wonders if he's holding it until such time that Mr. Duke clears himself of the encumbrances of being the president of the PSA and so on, and maybe he may divest that part of it to him.
Well, the thing is, I think prior to the election, Mr. Augustine made it clear that Mr. Duke would not be finance secretary. So if it is that after making such a clear and distinct pronouncement, it turns out to be as you suggest, then I think there would be a tremendous loss of faith in terms of the credibility and trust that they have with the public in Tobago. So I would be rather surprised if that were the intention. But if it turns out to be, then of course I think there would be a political price to pay for reneging on your clear and distinct word such as that.
Okay, well, you have to forgive me. I wasn't aware that he had made such a declaration. And
yes, he did. He did.
The interesting thing is,
so that's why I would be rather surprised if that turns out as you suggested.
Yeah. So how soon would you expect, and people in sort of your sector, in the private sector in Tobago, would want to hear him say something about that, how he's going to go about leading this audit?
Well, I would imagine that, with the turn of the new year, some arrangements would be put in place, and he would, start to indicate to us how he intends to manage this going forward, because we would definitely want to see, as I say, not only the reckoning, but we would also want to see the game plan going forward in terms of how they intend to meet and treat with their own financial issues. And of course, he would have to deal with the budget, because that's one of the priorities that I know that he has to focus on. So these are the things that one would expect that they would be dealing with, and we in the private sector are willing to partner and work along with them in that regard.
Thus far, has there been any approach from the incoming team to people in the Tobago private sector?
Not yet, but the fact of the matter is, we understand that they would have other priorities that they focused on, and they're getting settled. And it being Christmas season, and with all these things going on with the changes and the announcements made by the Prime Minister in terms of the reopening of beaches, we will give them a chance to settle in, and we expect that within the new year they will definitely be approaching us.
I'm glad you raised the issue of beaches, because that sort of obviates Mr. Augustine's, can we call it a threat, that he would take it on his own to open the beaches in Tobago, despite what is said in Port of Spain?
Well, I'm not sure it was put across that way exactly. He did say he would want to look at it and to see whether Tobago had that type of control under the 5th schedule of the THA Act. So I think that's how he had put it across.
Yeah, but given the Prime Minister's announcements, there may be no need to go there.
There's absolutely no need to go there.
Yeah. All right, my friend Martin George, Thank you very much for talking with us on this.
It's always a pleasure, Andy, and good morning to you, and good morning to your viewers.
Thank you very much, Martin George, Chairman of the Tobago Chamber of Commerce, on that matter, calling for a swift audit of the Tobago finances. We'll take a break. When we come back, we share with you the numbers, the Newsday poll, and then we'll be talking about, with a lady who is promoting a brand of treatment for children with autism. Stay with us.